Well, welcome everybody. Anyway, my name is Daniel Swadner, and I'm the curator of exhibition here at Promega. And this is, I guess, my 30th year of doing this. So thank you all for support through these years. This has been pretty fantastic. And of course, thanks to everybody at Promega, there's a lot of people, and I can't pronounce everybody's names, so they wanted me to just so you can see it so I don't screw everybody's name up. So I have trouble with my own name sometimes. But anyway, there's a lot of people involved in all this, and I'm really grateful for all the support from Promega. And I mean, look at the list of, it takes a lot of people, it takes a village, and what we're doing, and you are also an integral part of this. So I know some of the people have been coming for 20, 25 years to these events, and it's pretty amazing to see the same faces and new ones. There's every program, there's new ones. So thank you all for coming. But I do have to mention Stephanie Shea, who's brought this to another level of what I've done through the years. And of course to Bill Lenton for believing this in early on when nobody else did. So anyway, thanks to those two in particular. We have some great speakers, and I know you've had a little bit of time to look around and see what it is, and I think you'll learn quite a bit about the muralist and photography in general. I see there are some people here, photography groups here and stuff like that. So anyway, thanks for coming. And so we have 3 speakers, so I will shut my cake hole and get on with it and introduce Sharon Kilfoy, who I've known. I guess I kind of knew her back in the 70s when I was living here, but we weren't really friends. But I first worked with her it's been 10 years since we did an exhibition called Wallbound. And I brought some muralists from Arizona up here to work with people here, and Sharon was an integral part of that. And that event really got Sharon some seed money through Mark Ferrer and got really that whole project going. And you look around Madison, you'll see the effects of that Sharon has done through the years. And so I'm really glad to be able to feature her work in particular. So anyway, we've been friends for a long time, and I'm really happy to have her. She's also the director of the Williamson Street Art Center. And if you live on the east side, you already know this about her. But anyway, I'm really glad to introduce Sharon Kilfoy. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm really happy to be here. I'm exhibiting what for me is a new body of art that I call disintegrations. So thank you to everybody who's made this possible. Okay, here we go. Just wanted to make sure I remembered which way to go with these slides. The work that I'm displaying here, they're sort of complex, and I thought, well, in order to explain them to you, that I should probably tell you a little about myself. I was born in Chicago, knew from an early age that I was an artist. I went to the junior school of the Art Institute of Chicago when I was in high school. That was super cool. I knew my way around a dark room, went to that yearbook meeting thinking I could help with some photography, and walked out being the editor. So that was a lot of work. I had 12 years of Catholic school, and I quit going to Mass and to religion class. I made money. I sold wreaths, pine cone wreaths at the hardware store. I worked at the local hospital. I babysat. I made enough money to do a summer abroad program in Europe in between my junior and senior year of high school. And seeing the splendors of the Vatican contrasted with the poverty of the Italian countryside, I decided, done. That's it. I couldn't support the hypocrisy. And interestingly, they let me stay in school. I was allowed to spend Mass and religion class in the art room as I spent study hall and every other spare moment I had. And they gave me the art award when I graduated from high school. Anyway, then I came here to the UW. The art department told me I would have to take basic art classes, and I thought, well, can't do that. So I was able to get into certain art classes. I made most of my important work on my own. I was pretty rudderless that first year here, and then I stumbled into a 19th century German philosophy, Marx, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, and Hegel. I adored Hegel. So I got quite smitten by philosophy and ended up getting a bachelor's in philosophy. Went to Mexico City, studied at the Escuela de Diseño y Artesanía in Mexico City. I lived on the border, mostly in Nuevo Laredo. I taught yoga there. I had a gallery in Houston where I exhibited collages. And I began to envision a series of boxes. And I actually had the boxes made in Nuevo Laredo. And I filled those boxes when I got back to Madison, had decided it was time to go back to school, get a master's in the art department. They said, well, you might have to take some basic classes. But once I saw the boxes, I didn't need to. So I figured it's the boxes that got me into grad school. By the time I was ready to get that degree, I had 2 kids. One was a baby. And I figured, well, it wasn't fair to her to drag her up to the university. So I had my studio in my basement. She literally hung out with me. She was in a little swing down there in the basement. And that's where I did my work. And I had to choose professors based on who would come all the way to Willie Street from campus, and there were only a few who would do that. This is from the master's exhibit that was at the Union, so I've got more slides from that exhibit. So I was happy, working as an artist, being a mom. Around the same time, I got a job with CETA, which was a government program. It was kind of like the WPA program that had put artists into the community. And this was in the 70s, though. And we had an initial contract for 12 months, and then we were renewed for 6 more months. I was hired as the drawing teacher, but I did a lot of mixed media, boxes, assemblages, worked in rural high schools and inner city neighborhood centers. And I found that I really, really loved teaching. There was so much demand for murals. That's when I started doing murals, the work that I'm probably best known for. So I'm going to pause and share with you some insights. And this is one that I learned from teaching. Early on, I had worked in a lot of media, drawing, collage, assemblage, photography, ceramics. It made me feel kind of disjointed as an artist. And of course, people would always say, oh, you're an artist, do you paint? But I realized through teaching that it doesn't matter what the medium is that I'm working in. I bring my own internal sense of design to whatever that medium is. And it was very liberating. I'm free to work in any media that I choose. I'm free to mix them however I want. So anyway, becoming a community muralist, my first murals were inside community centers and daycares. This is back when I was working for CETA. My first exterior murals were in my own Willie Street or East Side neighborhood. I don't know if you can see in that photo, there's a little thing hanging down there by my stomach. That's actually a baby carrier. Here are a mural at Wilmar, one at what had been the Atwood Community Center, a couple that are on campus. The Humanities Building mural is still up. One that I did with Celery Hall students. I loved working in Sun Prairie. Here's a group that I worked with there, alternative high school students, working during the Corn Festival. Centro Hispano, I spent many years at Centro Hispano. Mainly I worked with high school kids, alternative high school programs. I had a day job at the Respite Center, which was a 24-hour emergency crisis child care center for kids whose families were in crisis, kids birth through 14. And so while I was out in the community working with alternative programs, I was on the forefront at the Respite Center, really learning how to use art and other modalities to work with kids who had experienced trauma. I had a lot of fun. The city hired me. They had passed the ordinance, the city of Madison, they had passed the ordinance to be able to do paintings on pavement intersections. I did that in 4 different neighborhoods. This is the Allied neighborhood by the Boys and Girls Club. It was a lot of fun, but it was exhausting. Mexico, here's San Pancho. I worked with a middle school there. Guadalajara, Drexel Elementary School. I've worked there a number of times. People are here today that are part of the Tepatitlan and Madison Exchange Program. We're sister cities. I've done murals there, and now actually one of my daughters has recently done a mosaic in Tepatitlan. So, another little insight. Where did I get that energy to be a community muralist? I have to say, I got as much energy from people as I gave to them, maybe more. The thing about being a community artist, it's not about your own singular expression. It's in some ways almost the opposite. You need to put your own ideas aside and you serve as a conduit for the community that you're working with. It's very, very gratifying work. It takes energy and it also takes a certain degree of organization. At some point, I felt like this is too much. There was really a huge demand for community muralists. And my friend, I don't know if he's here, Mark Freire, had just started with Dana Arts. I knew him back from when he was with the Wisconsin Arts Board. And I said, Mark, let's, why don't you have me partner with Dana Arts and do a mural program? So that's what we did, founded Dama. Alicia and Amita here are the 2 original artists who worked with me, and that painting, which was on the side of a building along the Beltline, is the one that Daniel alluded to, the artist who came up from the Southwest, whose work was shown here at Promega. They came and they were part of this mural program. Anyway, I wish I had started Dama and when I was a lot younger. I ended up really kind of burning out. Karen Wolf, the arts director, called me the mother of murals, and it was a big honor to have that title bestowed upon me. Anyway, so the work that I'm showing here, disintegrations. I feel that I have to tell you that I've always sewn. My mom, of course, was my sewing teacher. She let me start using the sewing machine when I was 10. I was able to make a skirt. She made me redo that zipper 3 times. So I do know how to sew. I did a lot of fabric figures with kids in artisan residencies throughout the state of Wisconsin. I literally worked with thousands of kids. And if you call them dolls, boys aren't as interested. If you call them fabric figures, they'll be right alongside the girls making them. I did a couple of different residencies at Lowell. I did fabric figures there, and the murals that I did at Lowell are still there. I did a project for Madison's 150th birthday. Lots of people donated to that. Those were up at Center for Families for many, many years. They're now in my attic, if anybody knows a place that might like them. Anyway, I envisioned fabric collages that I called fabrications. And I loved that body of work, but I began to feel that they were too crafty or too precious and that I needed to alter them somehow or another. And I just want to stop with one other insight. That's when I envisioned these disintegrations. And I don't know if it works for other artists this way, but I will see bodies of work. And it's kind of like dreaming because it happens at night, but I'm not asleep. So it's maybe more like visions, but I actually see whole bodies of work. And then, I need to make them. And it's very cool. It's like usually, I know we all like to sleep at night, or whenever it is that we sleep, we want to sleep. But it's worth losing it if you're actually, if however that happens, wherever that inspiration is coming from, I'm grateful. I'm going to skip that one, and I'm going to come right here to the disintegrations. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process. I store fabric up in my attic. They're in clear plastic bins. I have a piece of muslin or some sort of fabric on the floor that is a little bigger than what I need it to be, so I've got that extra fabric to be able to use to wrap. And then I composed right there on the floor in the attic. I've got skylights up there, so the natural light is good for me to be able to see color. I pin everything, and then I sew, and that's what takes the longest time, and I often will do that at night while I'm watching movies, sitting at the computer. Then I take them out to my studio in the back. I paint them out there. I put them up on the wall. I look and I see if they need more paint. And the work itself will tell me if it needs more paint. These are all here. And what I found with the painting, there's a huge element of chance. It's not that I don't sort of control how I paint, but I couldn't paint as well as chance itself paints. I don't really know how to explain it, but chance has really become a friend of mine, and I feel that I relied so much on control, and chance is actually really good. So anyway, what this work means to me, the disintegrations are born from the fear that we're not going to make it as a species on this planet. It might not be what you see in the work, but it's where it's coming from inside of me. There's this underlay that celebrates this golden age in which we're living. And it's a turning age. I think we all know this. It's turning. This work alludes to the Buddhist idea of samsara, that cycle of death and rebirth to which life in the material world is bound. This one I just have to tell you, if you can see, there are 2 half circles that are plaid. That's an umbrella that belonged to my in-laws. And I mean, it was such a great umbrella, I had to do something with it. Yeah. This one, you can see there's the Willie Street. It's from the tree. Erica is here, who made that tree. That's on the invite that hopefully you all got. Anyway, I hope that I'm wrong about our demise, that global enlightenment of our species will occur, and that all transient beings might prosper. One parting insight I'm kind of looking for, struggling with, and that I thought maybe you can help me with, and that's what connects the work I've returned to as a studio artist and that work that I had all those years as a community artist. I know that as a community artist, I was providing a voice for the community. And I feel that the connection, that you are the connection, that you helped me complete this work too, but I don't know how to articulate that very well. So if you have any ideas, you could copy that QR code. You could get a hold of me. There's my email. There's my place on Willie Street. Here's the garden. Here's my studio in the back. You're welcome to come and see the gardens. I don't know that if I'm working, I'm going to want to stop and chat. But I think you'd like the gardens. I think you'd like wandering around in a nice, quiet, safe place on Willie Street. And I'm very grateful for you all to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. That was great. We have 2 more speakers, and before I introduce them, I am going to take a little brief interlude, a little show and tell. I have props. So most people that know me know that I like thrift stores, and St. Vinny's in particular. So last week, I found something at St. Vinny's, and I just want to show it to you quickly. It's a mosaic in glass, and I saw it laying down, and I was like, wow, mosaics, I love mosaics. That's a really cool piece. And it was, I shouldn't say, but it was $4. So I'm buying it, you know? So I hurry up and I pay for it, and I get out to the parking lot where I'm going to put it in the car, and so then I see something totally different with the light. So what you see is something completely different that I didn't see when I first got it. And the point is that what we have with the photography here is the difference between reflective imagery and illuminated imagery. And this really, this is what this is about. You see, it totally becomes something different when it's illuminated. And the exhibition prints we have are primarily of illuminated imagery, like a Kodachrome or something like that, that sort of concept. So the print material doesn't give you the total experience of what you're going to see in this exhibition. So I just thought, wow, this is so rich to see that. So get an idea of what they're talking about. And these people will explain it much better than I can. But I just thought I would illustrate that that's the difference. Anyway, I'm going to introduce Heather Sontag, and she invited me over to see this collection, the Marc Jacobs collection last year, and right away I'm thinking, she wanted to tell the story, and how do you do that? Well, I'm a storyteller, right? As a curator, that's what we do, and the look on her face, I hadn't thought of that, you know. So like, to me, it's a slam dunk. That's why I'm here. This is beautiful stuff, and I've always loved autochromes. I've seen them in the past, and we're illuminated from where they're supposed to be in an exhibition in Thessaloniki years ago. And so anyway, Heather, I'm going to read this so I don't screw this up, because she's an associate archivist for the Center of Railroad Photography and Art, based here in Madison, where she is currently processing the color slide collection of Richard Steinheimer. She received her doctorate from UW-Madison on 19th century photography albums of Russian colonial Central Asia. Was a Fulbright scholar to St. Petersburg in Moscow, has interned with the Library of Congress Prints and Photos Division, and processed the collections of the outsider artist Sid Boyum and commercial photographer John Trumbull at the Wisconsin Historical Society. The Marc Jacobs collection is not her first curated exhibition. She has also curated for the U.S. Consulate in Kazakhstan, the UW-Madison Kohler Library, and special collections, and independently here in Madison. She hails from Albuquerque, Mexico, New Mexico, the other Mexico. Let's not get some people have gotten confused lately, including me. But anyway, I'm really honored to have her, and we should be really lucky she's in our community. Heather Sontag.
Thank you, Daniel. Just going to open one of these. Well, thank you, Daniel, and also thank you very much, Stephanie, for this invitation, for all the help in organizing for these past several months, and also for this opportunity to present Marc Jacobs and his remarkable collection of early color photography. I am a relative newcomer to these Promega art showcases, beginning to attend the events in about 2018, and really never in my wildest dreams would I have thought I'd be up here representing an exhibition, let alone curating one. It truly is an honor to be here to represent Marc, his life passion and expertise. And I'm not here as an artist, I am here as an archivist. One of two caring for this collection, the other being my mentor and friend, Andy Krashar, who I met at the Wisconsin Historical Society before he retired as head archivist of visual materials. And we are 2 of 5 on the Marc Jacobs collection team stewarding the long-term preservation for future generations. The others, and we were all friends of Marc's in varying capacities and lengths, are Steve Milanowski, who you'll hear from after me, his Marc's very dear friend Bob Hirsch out in Buffalo, who's part of SIPA Gallery, and also Jan Hubichka, who I'll talk about in a minute. So about Marc Jacobs, the collector, the collection, and what's on view in this exhibition. Marc Jacobs had a lifelong interest and career in photography, starting in his early teenage years when he began working at Phototech Camera in Skokie, Illinois, his hometown. And by the age of 22, he owns this shop and he's running it for the next 15 years. During these years, he also developed courses and wrote textbooks on photography for secondary level curricula, and he co-authored books like Photography in Focus, which, as you can see, had many editions. He also attended the Illinois Institute of Technology's Institute for Design for a degree in photography, specializing in the black and white wet darkroom tradition. Marc began collecting at least as early as the 1970s, and his interests included the earliest photographic formats like cased images of daguerreotypes, ambrotypes, and tintypes. But he's beginning to zero in on early color processes, all dating between the 1890s and 1930s. And these consist of chromograms, trichromes, and those named for their inventors, Joly, Dufay, Paget. And generally speaking, what these processes have in common is that they are photographic monotypes. They're all on glass, and they fall into a category of what is called additive color screen plate processes, color achieved by a transparent color filter screen that is covered with a mosaic of 3 primary colors, red, green, and blue, that act as filters and appear on the plates as lines or dots, like you see the lines on the Joly there. The chromogram is another example among these early processes, and invented by the American Frederick Eugene Ives. It was the first commercial application of the 3-color processes, patented and marketed in 1892. The image shot separately through filters of red, green, and blue were then bound together in a single slide to be projected or placed in a viewing device called a chromoscope. Here's a stereochromogram, and I'd really love to see Sharon make this a mural on one of our buildings here in Madison. As archivists, part of our job is to add context to collections and learn more about creators, objects, and eras. So in preparing for today's talk and this exhibition, I was really thrilled to learn a little bit more about William Saville Kent. He was a British marine biologist who was working in Australia for fisheries, but he also was studying the Great Barrier Reef, photographing various specimens. And as you can see on the right there, he also hand drew some of these specimens of the corals and hand colored them. So it occurred to me that his mind must have literally been blown when he was discovering chromograms and he could start to be photographing in color. A final example of these very rare and short-lived processes was invented by the Chicagoan John Powrie in 1905. This is a close-up to the right, you can see, of the mosaic screen with the lines. And how it looks today. Jan Havuchka, who really prepared all our digital files for printing at Picture Salon, made this composite, which is in the exhibition. And the lower right-hand corner of the composite, lower left, shows his analysis with infrared to determine what the natural background would have been. The top is showing its faded aspects being a little bit more pink. And then Jan reconstructed it digitally, so we see the natural colors of those butterflies. But the majority of Mark's collecting would consist of autochromes. According to the photo historian John Wood, autochromes are regarded as the most luminous and beautiful of all color processes. They were also more available on the collector's market because the commercial success of the autochrome Lumiere simply supplanted these other processes, which I just talked about. The articles on this slide are intended to convey the time involved from innovation to patented invention, as much as time invested then as now in R&D, involving dedicated lab experimentation, observation, analysis, peer review, and in this case, it's all with chemistry, light, and optical technologies. So on the left is an article from 1895 in Scientific American about modifications being made by the Lumiere brothers, Auguste and Louis. And on the right, 12 years later, from Paris in 1907, published in the Illustrated London News, is the public announcement of their perfected color process. They patented the autochrome Lumiere in 1903 and began commercially marketing it in 1907. And at that time, there was a color fever happening among well-known photographers. Stieglitz said, "Soon the world will be color mad and the Lumieres will be responsible." And Edward Steichen remarked, "One must go to stained glass for such color resonance." The color inset you see is represented in the autochrome to the left. And it shows dots, which are actually microscopic grain particles of potato starch that are sized 10 to 15 thousandths of a millimeter in diameter, that are spread thinly on the mosaic screen on glass. And a typical 5x7 autochrome plate would have had up to 140 million colored points or individual grains. And on average, the mixture was made up of 32% red-orange starch, 41% green, and 27% blue-violet. So these are some of the ways in which people would have appreciated these autochromes 100 years ago, going to lantern slides, a little bit like what we're doing now. They're going to camera clubs and photo societies, or they're showing them in the privacy of their home, in the parlor or the salon. You know, this is the Victorian era, the Edwardian era in Britain. Or you might have consumed these visual beauties intimately through a device called a diascope. And a diascope was a box hinged on the short edge that opened to about 45 degrees, letting light come through an autochrome that's placed over glass and then reflected off a mirror. And you really are sticking your face kind of inside these. So you just have this really intimate world. And in this case, it's the world of A Woman in Blue by Helen Messinger Murdoch, one of two women in the Marc Jacobs collection. So all the while Mark is collecting, he's also researching and writing, and he amassed his own personal library of rare books. In July of 1980, Mark wrote a magazine article entitled Postcard Country early autochromes of the Rockies, which reintroduced the forgotten autochrome process to the general public. And by this time, he's acquired half of the collection of the American photographer Fred Payne Clatworthy. And I'd just like to give a shout out to my coworker and colleague, Adrian Evans at the Center for Railroad Photography and Art, who actually digitally cataloged the other half in Colorado of the Clatworthy collection. And she got to meet Mark when she relocated here. So in 1980, Mark is also beginning to lecture on Clatworthy, and he does so at the National Conference for the Society for Photographic Education. A year later, he's organized an exhibition of autochromes at the California Museum of Photography in Riverside, which happens to be the first exhibition of actual autochromes in the United States in some decades. And by the early 2000s, Mark and his collection have gained renown across North America and Europe. His collection is regarded notable for including pioneers, inventors, and famous photographers, and his research is adding to the overlooked and understudied history of early color photography. And by this time, he's also connecting with serious scholars of the process. One of them is Jan Habuchka, pictured in both these on the right, with Mark on the left. And they develop a really fond friendship, really collegial, very close. They're sharing research, and they're organizing symposia and exhibitions to celebrate and elevate the autochrome. Major events result, and in 2008 in Czech Republic, they have a workshop for the 100th anniversary of the autochrome Lumiere, and a few years later, in 2012, they've organized an exhibition called When the World Turned to Color, Early Photography from the Marc Jacobs Collection. And this is a website that's still available online, you can peruse. And Mark's autochromes are also being published by his friends and colleagues who are photohistorians, like John Wood, Robert Hirsch, and Rochelle Cross-Force. And anyone who knew Mark knew him to be extremely generous and kind in sharing his expertise and his collection, and even publishing rights. So this is a very involved graph, I apologize, but just focus on the autochrome section. For this exhibition at the Promega Art Showcase, I was really inspired by this 2012 exhibition in Prague that I just mentioned, and I wanted to highlight in it the scope of creators by nationality, by gender. There are, at least, as I said, 2 women, Olive Edis and Helen Messinger-Murdoch. They're pioneers, inventors, famous people, and competent amateurs. And then I'm focusing, obviously, on the strength of compositions and subject matter. And the subject matter are all the genres of photography that you would expect with slow exposure times. Landscapes, portraiture, still lifes, and architecture. And I'm going to give a quick profile of the American photographer Fred Payne Clatworthy, because 50% of the autochromes in the Marc Jacobs collection are Clatworthy's, and 50% of those on view are also of Clatworthy. So he's a really very interesting man who in 1987 started a bicycle trip from Brooklyn to Chicago, and then a couple years later from Chicago to California. He eventually circles back, having passed through Colorado, and wants to live there. So by 1904, he's settled in Estes Park, and he's photographing all around the area in the Rockies. And he's also opened this really beautiful studio called Ye Little Shop to make and sell his photographs, postcards, among other items. And he's starting to make autochromes in 1914. With his photography success, he's also able to buy another home, a second home in Palm Springs by 1921. So there are a number of photographs of Southern California, like this one of his oldest daughter, Helen, in a super bloom. And he's also made several trips to the US Capitol. So there's a few from the East Coast, and you can see he's going in springtime, photographing the beautiful cherry trees. And on one occasion in 1917, he's presented many of his autochromes in a lantern show and the Smithsonian, showing Estes Park and the newly created Rocky Mountain National Park before members of Congress, where a Colorado senator was lobbying to expand the park boundaries. The day after Congress saw Clatworthy's presentation, the Senate passed Shafroth's bill. And it's just a testament to the power of photography. And if you know the history of Yellowstone, a similar thing happened there with William Henry Jackson in 1872. So this image was also published in Nat Geo, and you can see from the digital scan of the autochrome to what was published, it's not a one-to-one. It's really kind of horrible the way that it was translated to paper, but it was the best they could do back in 1928. And his exposure to Nat Geo allowed him to become a freelancer for the magazine, which used 75 of his photographs between 1923 and 1934. And incidentally, the first year that Nat Geo is using autochromes for color illustrated feature articles is 1914. So in these articles of Nat Geo, you're seeing pictures from Southern California. He's also traveling to the west coast of Mexico. He's also going to the Rockies and the Four Corners states, picturing Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Arches National Park, Mesa Verde. And he's going, and he's picturing American Indian communities from the Northern Rockies to the Four Corners states, and picturing four pueblos in New Mexico. And Clatworthy also gave his own lantern slide lectures in Estes Park, and these are pocket-sized announcements, like programs on beautiful handmade paper. So it's just an example of the ephemera that we have also in the collection that's part of Clatworthy. And you can see that he was also traveling to Hawaii and New Zealand. He was just really a man who couldn't sit still, I think. So beyond Clatworthy, in the Promega exhibition, we're also highlighting a range of autochromists who are the pioneers, like Louis Lumiere, who made what are akin to snapshots of their children. And so here we see his daughter Suzanne in her dad's Renault. And others like Edwin Wishart, who was the earliest staff photographer of National Geographic. Images like this one by Marcel Mays gives us a sense of time exposure in low light. And in this case, the model reportedly sat for 22 minutes because she's by an oil lamp. And it's another reason why many autochromists are taking their images outside in the natural light. There are also still lifes, and I'm not a big still life person, but I really want to eat that lobster. And there are impressionistic, luminous qualities of autochromes, as in this pastoral scene. And John Wood wrote that autochromes impart a shimmering world of suggestion, of haze, and nuance, being part photograph, part painting. Or capturing rolling waves, like this one by E.A. Fly. And this is the only autochrome I've seen that's capturing motion. It's also a late one. You can see it's in 1932. And there are a few magnifications of objects that really look like abstract art. And in this case, this is a rock by Frederick Bem. So the timeline of early color photography in Mark's collection shifts from glass to flexible film with separation negatives by the 1930s. And images like this one of Sally Eilers are made by a one-shot camera that would have been used to create 3 separate black and white negatives, or records, as they were called, each capturing a different channel, or red, green, blue, and then they're perfectly aligned to convey this colorful photograph. And the original print would have been a Carbro photograph. So to conclude, the exhibition is not in chronological order like I've just gone in this presentation. It's intended to inject Mark's voice. So in the description, wherever you see -MJ, that's directly from his research. And also what's on view, it's as much about art and beauty and color photography as it is about interconnected histories. The history of photographic processes, of visual technologies, of individual photographers, and of an era a century ago and longer. And so with that, I'll just conclude and say I hope you enjoy what you see. I'm introducing the next speaker. And Mark passed away in January of 2022. And it seems, I'm getting kind of choked up. It seems he and his collection have this lovely way of making friends and connecting people. And so Steve is kind of this new friend, I feel like. You know, a fellow photographer here in Madison. I was introduced to him through Andy Krashar. And he's now, like I said, he's a member of the Marc Jacobs collection team. And it's just been really great to work with him and collaborate on these presentations that we're giving today. So, and he has an impressive career, as you'll hear right now. Steve is both an advertising photographer and an anti-advertising image maker, whose work for Planet Propaganda and other agencies has been featured in communication arts. His non-advertising work has appeared at the Museum of Modern Art, Celebrations Animals and Birds collections, and was shown in 2 of Momoka, Wisconsin's triennial exhibitions. You can find Steve's photographs in permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the National Gallery of Art, the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, and the Cincinnati Museum of Art. He holds a BFA in photography and printmaking from the Cranbrook Academy of Arts and an MS in visual studies photography from MIT, where he wrote a thesis titled Factors Influencing the Neglect of Color Photography. So with that, Steve Milanowski.
I paid Heather to say those things. They're not true, any of them. You delivered it very believably, so that was good. I'm going to talk about 2 strands, really, of the history of photography, how it relates to color, and then the problems and the issues of color photography, why it was such a protracted entry into the world. So I hope you can bear with me on that. I'm going to start right away with the beginning of the history of photography. We'll give that date of 1839 when Louis Daguerre offered his product to the world. This photograph here is also taken by Louis Daguerre in 1837, 2 years before he introduced the daguerreotype. And I don't know how many of you have seen this in history of photography textbooks, but it's a terrific photograph. And you can see in the lower left a man getting a shoe shine. And yet, this photograph was a long exposure, I think at least a minute or longer, and yet Daguerre didn't even notice this man at the time. And luckily, it just has a transient quality while also looking like an architectural photograph. So the autochrome, I'll leave Louis Daguerre up there as I talk about the autochrome. I think of the autochrome as kind of the exotic birds and fruit of photography. It's very hard for us to ever see autochromes in real life. They're rare to see. They're not something you find easily. And when you do, you usually have to hold an autochrome plate and hold it up to a light source. So they've never been a very approachable piece of photography, like a print that you can put on a wall or a print that you can put on an album. So this will be my kind of pocket version of the difficult birth of color photography. I might also call this the strange case of color photography. Let me give you a little bit of a timeline. Think of this, from 1839 to 1907, there were 68 years before we had any kind of usable method of making color photographs. It took 28 more years from 1907 to 1935 to arrive at Kodachrome, which we all know, but that was the second large-scale color medium that was offered to amateur and professionals alike. Then from 1935, when Kodachrome was introduced, we had another 35 more years until really 1970 of widespread embrace of Kodachrome and color negative film. So really, we had an awful lot of years of waiting for color photography. Even though there was great anticipation and really, I would say, fevered excitement for the invention of photography, I want to point out that there was great disappointment in the initial invention of photography. And the disappointment was everyone, I think, generally responded, whether they were in Europe or America, with a kind of, well, where the hell is the color? There's no natural color in these photographs, it's black and white, and that's not how the world looks. And Daguerre and William Henry Fox Talbot in England, who kind of invented the first positive-negative version of photography, they said, well, we're working with silver and sensitized plates that involve silver, and this is all we have right now is black and white. So what came up next was this, our substitute color. And I think what we should remember is this was called hand coloring. You've all heard of it. You've seen hand-colored postcards. But this is what we did for over 120 years. We had black and white photographs, and we applied color to them. And they were lovely and beautiful, and human beings couldn't be satisfied with monochrome photographs. So here a photograph by Wallace Nutting, a well-known American, I'll call him a photographer, but he had multiple aspects of his life. And of course, I'll go on to another one here. Here is a photograph of Mulberry Street in the Lower East Side, New York City. We don't know who the photographer was here, but it was an image that later became part of Detroit Publishing, which is a well-known publisher of postcards. William Henry Jackson was behind that. And he and the company developed a thing that was kind of a variant on hand coloring called the photochrome. And really, they were doing the same thing of hand coloring, but here they developed a method of printing where lithographic stones, 4 or 5 of them were involved for each of the dominant colors that they wanted to have in the hand-colored scene. So this is a photochrome that had a brown lithostone, a green lithostone, and others. A wonderful image, and if you're bored sometime, look at the website of the Library of Congress and type in photochromes, and you can just see this great legacy of color. I'll call them, you could almost use the word colorized, of colorized images for the Detroit Publishing. All right. Well, here we have, and I think, Heather, you showed the Lumiere brothers. This is an ironic photograph of the two brothers because it was photographed on positive-negative materials rather than the direct positive, which was the daguerreotype. They are well known, I'm sure, to all of you. They first presented the autochrome to the French Academy of Science in 1904. Heather mentioned in 1903 they patented it. 3 years later, in 1907, they introduced the autochrome. The plates were commercially available in Europe and America. I should also note, like the daguerreotype, the autochrome was a direct positive. And I know I'm repeating that, but I want to emphasize that it was a one-of-a-kind direct positive. When you developed a daguerreotype and it was a finished image, it was a positive. You had no means of making a print from it. There was no negative. So this mirror-like metal plate that it was produced on and developed on, that was it. And if you wanted a copy of it, you would actually photograph a copy with another daguerreotype plate. That was how, and this is also true of the autochrome, right? The autochrome was a direct positive, a one-of-a-kind. And probably none of you need to be reminded of this, but I'll tell you, the prolific brothers also invented our first motion picture camera and motion pictures. So they were very busy from 1903, 1904 on to the introduction of the autochrome. And I suppose their time was more dominated by work with the motion picture camera than the autochrome. All right. This is a detail that Heather showed. I'll just show it briefly again. What you're looking at here are not, of course, these very microscopic potato starch grains that are dyed red, green, and blue. But in fact, what we're seeing are clumps of potato starch grains. So if we took a macro approach to a real autochrome, they have a look, a visual look when you see them, that they're very grainy. What you're seeing again in a real autochrome on magnification is clumps of potato starch grains. right. This is an ad from Alfred Stieglitz's publication Camera Work that first announced the availability of the autochrome in 1907. You can read it. I don't need to read it for you, but there was great excitement in America and in Europe for the autochrome. Just imagine 68 years where everyone wanted to make photographs in color, and you usually had to pay someone to hand color your black and white image if you wanted it in color, or you taught yourself how to hand color. The plates were available in Burlington, Vermont. There was a recent piece done on the former factory for the Lumiere company in Burlington, and that building still exists, and they're trying to resuscitate the early history of color photography in this building still in Burlington. Here's a box of autochrome plates as you would have bought them. And it's an interesting thing. It's from 1926. Mark had a number of these boxes. I think this is an empty box that he gave me, and I photographed it. They're just a beautiful object. 4 glass plates were inside this box, and that's what it looked like. Well, here is just a wonderful autochrome by Fritz Paneth, later in the 1920s. But you can see this grainy quality I'm talking about. Again, it was kind of the nature of the beast. It was the look of an autochrome because of the granular structure of it. This photograph, I'll just read what I have here. This is by Edward Steichen, a photographer that many of you may know was from Milwaukee. He was born in Belgium, but grew up in Milwaukee. He produced this wonderful autochrome in 1910. I'll call it what's possibly the first color masterpiece. I think it's just a wonderful photograph. Other historians have called it a masterpiece. It is of Emmy Stieglitz, and Emmy was the first wife of Alfred Stieglitz before Georgia O'Keeffe. Steichen, as you may know, this is just a side note, but he was a longtime photographer for Vanity Fair magazine, did wonderful portraiture for Vanity Fair. Later, as he was kind of winding down his history as winding down his career as a photographer, he became the curator of photography at the Museum of Modern Art. And just to be proud of Wisconsinites, the curator that followed him was John Zarkowski, who many of you may know, also a Wisconsin kid. He was an art history graduate of the University of Wisconsin. So the 2 most influential curators at the Museum of Modern Art were Wisconsin bred. This is a photograph, yes, 1910. And it's from a project that gets credit for maybe being the single largest project, biggest user ever of autochrome plates. It was a project called the Archives of the Planet, and it was started by a French banker by the name of Albert Kahn. And it's an unusual project because he had such enthusiasm as a Parisian for the autochrome and he had a lot of money, and he said, I'm going to hire photographers to photograph the world in color because we haven't been able to photograph it in color. And so the odd thing about this is that rarely do I see images from the Archives of the Planet where a photographer is credited. There's always a credit for Albert Kahn and that he commissioned this project, but rarely do we know the names of the photographers that shot for it. He and his photographers exposed over 20 years 79,000 autochrome plates. And so he really sent armies of people out into the world. The Archive of the Planet still exists I believe it's in Lyon, and I want to go there someday. there's still, and because it was invented in France, there's still a huge number of autochromes found in that country and in cities and antique stores and archives, but just a terrific photograph. Now, I'm going to come back to one more from the Archives of the Planet, but I'll break it up with this one. I was in Paris with my wife and family about 8 years ago, and I bought this autochrome at an antique photo store, a guy that sold old photographs. And so it's a wonderful photograph, wonderful autochrome. It's about 4 by 5 inches, and I think it was $30 or $40. And it's so rare, even to me as a photographer, to have original, beautiful autochromes. There's a lot of weak autochromes that are photographs of gardens and poorly made photographs, but this one is great. I'll remind you of one aspect of the speed, the light sensitivity of an autochrome. It was about the ISO of 8 for an autochrome, which is terribly slow, right? News photographers, when we used to shoot on film, shot on film speed like Tri-X that was 400 ISO. So an ISO of 8 is very slow. What that means is if you had an autochrome that you wanted to expose in bright sunlight, you would have to be at about F11 for 4 seconds to make that exposure, or F16 for 8 seconds. Imagine holding a young girl and a dog motionless for 8 seconds or even 4. So it's terribly slow, and that was just the nature of the beast of the autochrome. But so I'm amazed at this photograph. If you take a magnifier to it, her focus is a little soft. She couldn't hold still for too long, but still a wonderful image. Here's another image from the Archives of the Planet. Cambodian dancers. I mean, he literally sent photographers to Albert Kahn, to most countries in the world at that time. And this is around 1918. This is also a terrific autochrome by Fred Payne Clatworthy. It's in the show, as you know. You'll see it out there. We can't ever do these autochromes justice, though. Remember, this is a deceitful thing we're doing to show prints of autochromes, because they can't show the quality of transmitted light, like in the form of reflected light. So I wish we could show you the autochrome with backlighting. Still a great autochrome. Okay, this is the other thread I'm going to pick up and kind of just talk about another aspect of the history of color. I'll jump ahead because this is a photograph I made of Kodachrome boxes from around 1936. Let's see where. I'm going to talk about Walker Evans here. This is a photograph by Walker Evans. He was asked a lot about Kodachrome, and he, along with other photographers that I'm going to read some quotes to you about, were not fond of color photography. And it's surprising, and it's a little known aspect of the history of color, but they decided, those photographers that weren't fond of color, decided that color was too much the province of selling things and advertising. And it was sullied because of that, and forever tarnished. And it's a sad thing that happened, and it certainly happened, the bias against color happened before Kodachrome. Even, in 1939, we had the release after Kodachrome of the first Technicolor movie, The Wizard of Oz. And yet, in the general public, I think everyone was thrilled with color and Technicolor, a motion picture version of color films. But there were these photographers who said, hey, photography was born in black and white. That's its legacy. This color stuff is a different language that seems to belong to advertising. I'm not necessarily believing it was logical, but it was their stance. So here's a quote from Walker Evans about color photography. Color tends to corrupt, and absolute color corrupts it absolutely. Consider the way color film renders blue sky, green foliage, lipstick red, and the kiddie's play suit. These are 4 words that must be whispered. Color photography is vulgar. And it is vulgar. It's just, okay. Another photographer I greatly admire, like Walker Evans, Henri Cartier-Bresson. Here's what Bresson said about color photography. And by the way, if any of you ever want to try and track down color photographs made by either Walker Evans or Cartier-Bresson, it's a difficult search. Bresson said, quote, "Photography in color, it is something that is indigestible, the negation of all photography's 3-dimensional values." Later he said also in another conversation, color is for painters. Those are the people that should work with color. Okay, another photographer that most Americans admire, Ansel Adams. Of course, we all know his terribly impressive photograph made in black and white. Moonrise over Hernandez. Here's the quote that Ansel will be forever followed by about color. "If you can't make it good, make it red." That was it. That was it. That's what he felt about color photography. Here's another wonderful American photographer, well, actually a Swiss photographer who emigrated to America, Robert Frank, a great photographer, a committed black and white photographer. It's another famous photograph by Robert Frank. But I'll be there. I'm finish it up soon, right? Thank you. Robert Frank was rarely an admirer of color photography in either his still work or his film work. Here's his quote: "Black and white are the colors of photography." It was as simple as that for him. Robert Frank also said, "To me, black and white symbolize the alternatives of hope and despair to which mankind is forever subjected." Now that quote is pretty pithy and interesting, and I understand we're hard-pressed to ever find any color photographs made by Robert Frank. Okay, and I'll just finish up here. This is the last one by Robert Frank of the young Robert F. Kennedy. These are the types of photographs that so offended Walker Evans and Robert Frank, Ansel Adams. Advertising photographs that felt they were charged with the duty to deliver as much color per pound or per inch as you could. Here, an advertising photograph by Nicholas Murray. Another photograph by Nicholas Murray. Very skilled color commercial photographers. Dr. Paul Wolfe, who was kind of a color historian, but also an active commercial color photographer. Here, I don't even have the, well, maybe it is Garrett Howard. Heather may have given me the credit here, but a typical color album cover from the 1950s here for Julie London, where again, color is absolutely being employed to sell music, to sell albums. Here's an old ad for Kodachrome that was during this period where there was love of color photography and hostility at the same time. Here's a Kodachrome by Fred Payne Clatworthy that Heather mentioned, of course. He switched to Kodachrome. Kodachrome was available in small formats and sheet formats as time went on. He stopped shooting on autochrome. Here's just a few final autochromes and I'll be finished. a wonderful photograph that is from the George Eastman House, who in America probably has the largest collection of autochromes, a collection that I wish we could all see more easily. Terrific autochrome. Here, an Alfred Stieglitz autochrome of Georgia Engelhardt, a young girl at Lake George that he photographed in her early years as well as in her teen years. Someday I'll try and have you come upon the later black and white portraits that Stieglitz did of Georgia Engelhardt. There are a couple images on books of his work. Here's a great photograph, a great autochrome from Marc Jacobs' collection of what I can only think is a girl's birthday party in Paris, on the outskirts of Paris. But we really don't know much about this. Two boys playing checkers, autochrome. Leon Gimpel. Marc Jacobs was very knowledgeable about this photographer, a terrific autochrome from 1909. This photographer, we all want to see more of his autochromes. Jules Gervais Cortelmont photographing this plein air painter. It obviously, you have to look at it for a while and realize it's a photograph. It could be easily confused with an illustration. Edward Steichen autochrome, also from the Eastman House. This photograph was found 20 years ago in an attic in Buffalo, New York, and it was ultimately found, and the owner of it decided to give it to the Eastman House, and it's a terrific image. A portrait here by Edward Steichen, 1915 autochrome. It's interesting, as autochromes improved in quality, they could have a look that wasn't the typical granular look. And here, one of my favorite autochromes of Edward Steichen's daughter, Mary Steichen, 1908. Here, the opposite of that last portrait, very grainy looking. Perrault by Louis Lumière, 1908. One of the great autochromes in Marc's collection. And here, another image, an autochrome from the Eastman House. Woman in satin dress. We don't know the photographer. Boy, I love the photograph. It's been published a number of times and considered a masterpiece by some. Too bad we don't know more. And here's the last autochrome by Robert Dash, a French autochrome from 1926, in the studio with artificial light. And so that is very interesting to just see artificial lights being used in a studio setting in 1926. That's it.
The work is kind of complex, and I think it comes from a lot of different places. Sewing, of course, I love fabric. My mom taught me to sew when I was quite young. I've always known I was an artist, but also I have a degree in philosophy, and so where are we at? What are we doing? Why are we here? All those big questions. So I think all of that enters into this work. I call it disintegrations. The disintegration that happens with fabric, the disintegration that happens with us, but also civilization. Where are we at? What are we doing? Are we going to make it? I sort things according to color, and I like to mix colors. the significance of the thing, if it's something that maybe one of my kids wore, even one of my brothers, or something that I just bought at a secondhand store. Really doesn't matter in terms of the composition. I really do compose according to color. There's a triptych out there that's purple. This good friend sent me some flowers here, which is very nice, and they're all shades of purple. So perhaps she thought I would be wearing purple, but I have to admit I love red.
Well, I started, you could say, at the front end of archives as a researcher when I was in graduate school, and I was handling 19th century photography albums, and I just realized how truly magical it was to get my hands on these really old things that people made. It was the wet plate collodion photography, the earliest reduplicative photography, which is the precursor to our modern photography of the mid-1860s. And it was just magical. When I finished that degree, I just wanted to keep working with things in my hands as well as thinking about them in my brain. I started a photography discussion group here in Madison with a number of very serious photographers. My mentor suggested having Mark come to the group and be a member. Mark once or twice brought an autochrome, and we just started becoming friends. I taught a class on photography in war, and the autochrome overlaps the era of World War I. And so there are a number of color photographs of that war, and some exist in Mark's class. So he allowed me access to these images so I could reproduce them for my lecture slides. You know, Mark was just a really special person, and not to say that there aren't a lot of special people out there. But he stands out. You know, these objects can't be collected by everyone, and hardly anyone has them. So a lot of people collect black and white photographs by masters, but not everybody can find an autochrome because they were just, so it was just a small market from 1907 to the 1930s. They also don't last forever. If they're not kept in the right climate, humidity and heat can really deteriorate them. So we lose that record as well. And Mark, he just was obsessed, and he really dove in and cared about them. So I think it's his passion. He was a very kind person, and he really shared that with people, and he just left us too soon. So archives are really special. They're unique objects that really can't be replaced, and they do have a strong sense of history. I am specifically a visual materials archivist, not just photography, and focusing on visual materials, it tells us a different story, and many stories can be told of that, but if you can sequence images or see images of a particular geography that were made in the same era, and then compare them with images 100 years later, you can see how we change as human species and how we're treating the land and the environment. And so it's really all about history and the importance of history. Knowing where we came from so that we can inform the present and hold on to some hopefully wise decisions for the future.
First became interested in photography in 9th grade in high school. I photographed for my high school newspaper and had access to a darkroom, so I've been doing it a long time. It's just important to know the legacy of the medium you're interested in. There's been a lot done in a given field before you ever came along. Artists are taught art history. Photographers should be aware of the rich legacy that happened before they began making photographs. So many photographers rejected color because it was used in advertising and it was used to sell things. And
It was difficult to do color photography in the early days and costly, expensive. And so the only good practitioners of color in the early days were people that had the money and technical ability to make these difficult photographs. It became for too many decades associated just with commerce and selling things and advertising. And advertising to a lot of photographers was a dirty word. And when autochromes were being made, you weren't walking into people's homes or studios and seeing autochromes. They were hard to see. They were in boxes, right? Because they were transparency. So you didn't see them on someone's wall, or you did start to see them in the National Geographic reproduced, but this was a hidden part of photography in a lot of ways. And the time color eventually was no longer hidden was when we had Kodachrome. I showed that Edward Steichen photograph, a portrait of a woman with a copper bowl. I agree with other people that have called it a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece of early color photography.